In today's video, I'm going to be giving you all the help you need to succeed at this week's Daily Race C with an in-depth guide at Le Mans in the Toyota Hybrid and some race strategy information that should help improve your DR this week. So let's get straight into the guide. And now for this week's guide, we do not have the telemetry for the actual lap we were doing because we were live at this point of the night, but we do have the telemetry at the end in the chase camera footage. So if you want to check that out, make sure you check it out. You'll see all the braking and acceleration inputs for that one. So let's get into the guide to try and help you get as far up that grid as possible. So going into turn one, you're going to get the car over and right up to the curb, and then once you are in a straight line, you're getting onto the brakes pretty much as soon as the car is straight before that total sign, onto the brakes. Now you're going to start rotating it in. Now into this first apex, you can take a lot of curb off on the initial entry. So you can see here, as we go through the first point, as long as your right hand tyre is still touching the actual curb, you should be able to get away with that without a penalty. I didn't take enough off there, which compromised me slightly as I go through the second part, but the same rules apply for the next right hand corner. As long as your left hand tyre is pretty much touching the curb, you can get away with it. And again, on the exit, as long as your right hand tyre is on the curb, you should get away without a track limit penalty. Now going into this next section, you can see again, once we've got the car straightened up just past the last cone on the right hand side, we're going to get onto the brakes. Now from here, we're going to go down to fourth gear and start rotating in with a bit of trail braking. Just let the car coast briefly and then back onto the throttle. Now turning in here, you want the right hand tyre to get as close to that bollard as you can get without hitting it, and that will enable you to carry the acceleration on all the way through the corner and then into this next fast right hand corner. Now as soon as we go through the sector split, you're going to be getting on the brakes just past that. I always listen to that sector split delta for my indication to get on the brakes and chuck this car into this right hand corner. And same rules apply for this right hand corner. Again, left hand tyre up onto the curb, right hand tyre can take a little bit more than the curb, and on the exit, be sure to get your right hand tyre and your left hand tyre and right hand tyre back over to the track as early as possible before the end of the curb there. If you go too far wide, that's where you're going to pick up a penalty. Now into the next braking zone, we're going to go past these marshals on the left and where the barrier sticks out slightly, and then just onto the brakes, pretty much dead in the middle of the 200 and the 100 board, maybe a bit closer to the 100 there, and then into this next right hand corner. Same rules again, left hand tyre, as long as it's just on the curb, you should be okay for track limits. So right up again, aggressively over there. And again, for this next left, as long as your right hand tyre is on the curb, you can get that left hand tyre right up onto the curb. Now this will help you with getting on the throttle a little bit earlier. And then again, on the exit, you can go over the white line there, as long as it's a little bit later on. Too early over the white line is a penalty. A little bit later is no penalty. So working our way into this next left hand corner, again, we're going to use a 100 board as our reference going into this left hand corner. And again, same thing, as you're going into the entry, you want to turn it in nice and early here and get that right hand tyre right up over the curb. As long as you don't go over the curb with your right hand tyre, you should be okay for not picking up a penalty. As you can see, I'm being very aggressive there. And again, use the second gear just as you come off the curb to rotate it into the next part. And again, you can get right up onto the curb. And the same rules apply here. As long as your right hand tyre doesn't go over that white line too early on, you shouldn't get a penalty. You can go over it obviously and get right up onto that curb, but it has to be a little bit later on in the corner. Too early and it's going to be invalidated on the lap. So into the next braking zone at the end of the straight, we're going to use these two little fences here as a reference for our braking, pretty much getting on the brake as we see the marshals on the right hand side there. You can see the marshal onto the brakes and now going into this tight right hand corner. Now you're going to brake and keep the car going over to the left hand side and then use the gear shifts to rotate it, and then just as we're coming into the corner into first gear, that will give it a little bit of extra rotation, but then we're going to get back up to second gear as we get on the throttle. So first gear, second gear, and then slowly feed that throttle in. You can see 50% throttle and then all the way up to that 100% throttle as we feel the grip building. Now remember to try and straighten line these cars up as quick as possible, because this car's running the hybrid system. The straighter it is, the more efficient the hybrid will be at getting down that power. So again, into this next right hand corner, it's all about carrying the speed in here. We're not on the brakes at this phase, but then as we enter into the corner, before the shadow there, you can see the change of where the daylight and the shadow there. We're getting on the brakes just before that. Right hand tyre just briefly touching the curb, and then when we're in a straight line, aggressively onto the brakes, and then we're going to start rotating it into this left hand corner with that third gear. Now trail braking into the corner and then onto the throttle quite aggressively. You want to stay on that throttle as aggressively as you can to carry the momentum out of this corner, and then braking just before the 50 board on the left hand side. You can see a little bit before that 50 board. This will give you the ability to slow the car down, rotate it with first gear, again that first gear shift for a bit of rotation, and then back up to second gear. So as we go into the corner, we're going up to second gear there just as you hit the apex of the corner, and then getting on that throttle again 50% before we go to 100%, and then accelerate out the corner all the way up the long straight now into the final sector. Now this is all about carrying the speed through here, using the Astro on the left hand side there as the start point of where we're getting on the brakes. You can see just as we go past it, we're onto the brakes, and now we're going to try and hold quite an aggressive line through this corner. I like to get very early into the apex, get the right hand tire up onto the curb, and then that gives you the ability to get back onto that throttle aggressively and carry the momentum all the way through this next sector. Now you do not need to lift through here, up into 6th gear, and then into this next left hand corner. You can stay on the throttle, just a brief little lift as we go into that part of the corner, and then it's about getting on the brakes here to try and hug the right hand side. So you ideally want to come from a slightly wider angle than what I've done there. You can see I'm slightly compromised now. I have to give it a little bit more of a lift than what I would have liked, but then we come to the RMC sign. Before the RMC, we're going to get onto the brakes and chuck this car in. You want to get the left hand tire over the curb on the left hand side. This will help with the rotation as you carry the speed and keep that throttle down in 5th gear. Now just be careful on the exit, you don't go too far wide. You want to get the car back onto the track before the end of the curb, because if you don't, you run the risk of getting the penalty there. So now into these last few corners, and this is where you can lose a lot of time. As we go into the pit lane entry there, you can see pretty much in the middle from the start to where the curb is. We're going to get onto the brakes, and we're going to use some of the curb to rotate this car in from a wider angle. Now you want to get the left hand tire over the curb on the entry, so you can see as we go into the corner here, left hand tire up onto the curb, and then a little dab of the brakes to start rotating it back to the right hand side and get that right car over the curb as we go through the corner. And then again, downshift the 2nd gear, bit of brake input going in, and then we're going to use that 1st gear for a bit of extra rotation, then back up to 2nd gear. And you can see you really want to attack this line. Just be careful on the track limits. You can get away with being very aggressive through here, and again up to 3rd gear before we hit the last curb. And again, a little lift off the throttle as we go up to the curb there before getting back on the throttle aggressively and carrying that momentum all the way to the finishing line. So hopefully this will help you out. Hopefully it'll get your lap time a little bit quicker, start you a little bit higher up on the grid. But let's go into the race now and talk about the strategy for this week. So for this week, dirty air is back. The slipstream is unreal. This means you're going to struggle when following other cars. Now in this race, we're starting from P9, so we're right amongst all that dirty air, and we're going to talk about the strategy options when you're in this situation. So from P9, there's different ways of doing this race. Now you have got the option obviously of staying out and trying to feed your way through the traffic and get past with the slipstream, but this is going to be a difficult way of doing it. As you can see there, we actually got pinball physics in front of us and picked up damage on the front and rear. And this is something I actually wanted to point out for this video, is be very, very careful when stuff like that happens, because if you're in a pack like this, you're going to get an insane amount of understeer now, because obviously the front end damage, the rear end damage, and the car will understeer massively there. So try and be very, very cautious in that scenario. Now we're going to see another issue here when you're following another car's. The driver there demonstrates the lack of grip when getting on the throttle, especially near a curb. It's very easy to run it into the wall, and you can see I actually had massive understeer from the car in front as well, and picked myself up a nice penalty there. So one benefit of the real slipstream is you don't have this ridiculous strength for slipstream. So you can see his car on the right here, he's able to pull out and actually go for a move, and I'm not going to get dragged forward by that slipstream of being in the slip of the cars in front. So definite benefit there. Now you can see he's in the slipstream this time, but he is going to get that little bit of drive out of that corner because he's still in it, and we're going to have to tuck back in behind him. But it is much better in terms of that strength of slip. Now, because of this situation we've got going on here, I was going to pit here because ideally I'd rather be out of the slip and solo. But because that driver pitted, I decided to stay out and do an extra lap here, because there's a bit of a gap to the car in front, and the closer you get to that car, the worse the dirty air is going to be. So because the driver that was right in front of me pitted, I knew that I'd be struggling on the first few corners after pitting. So next lap, he stays out. I decide to pit this lap. We've started to catch up to him, so into the pits here, and now hopefully we've got the jump over the other car, and we've then got fingers crossed, clean air coming out. And you can see this has actually worked really well because we've managed to get ahead of the driver that pitted in front of us, and now we've got some lovely clean air. So from the further the back you are, pitting early is a very good idea. Now you want to determine that by what cars pit in front of you and what cars don't. It is very much a game of watching what other people do and reacting to their strategy, as well as, you know, planning your own. So as we come through here, we take a little bit too much off that corner there. You can see I was a bit over the line and rewarded with a lovely 1 second penalty there. So that's going to kind of affect us as we come to the end of this lap, and we have to take that. But you can see a few more cars are in the pits there, and even with that 1 second, we look pretty safe. We've got quite a big gap to P7, so we've got a big jump over them cars that have stayed out a little bit longer. And yeah, it's worked out quite nicely in this race so far. So as we come to the end of lap 5 again, more cars are in the pits, and we've just had some clean running here without any dirty air, and we're now up to P4. And you can really see why getting in that pits nice and early has helped us out in this race. We're just able to run our own race. Not particularly great lap time that we did on that lap because of the penalty, but you can see as we go over the line on lap 6 here, on lap 5, we're now again up into the podium position, and everything's quite nice because we're just getting clean and running, no one's in our way, and then by the time we get over the line, we managed to get ourselves in that podium position, and not a bad result. So pitting early really did help us out in this one. Getting in the pits, avoiding the traffic, it's the best way to run this race. The less traffic you have, for me, even though this has got a lot of straights, I prefer running solo than I do following another car. It's just, you struggle, you're more likely to pick up penalties. Now, in a different situation, if you're starting at the front of the grid, your strategy will be slightly different, because the options you have of pitting early are reduced slightly. Because if we go in the pits, say lap 1, to try and get away from the car's dirty air, although the car in front of us is a very quick driver, we're not going to need to worry about the dirty air in this race. But if that was a driver that we could stay with really well, at this point here, you can see we're managing to stay with him. Pitting early would be a bit of a risk, because further back the grid, if there's been any issues on lap 1, by the time they pit, and by the time you pit and you come out, you could end up only 3-4 seconds behind them, and then you've got to catch them up, and you could end up in their slipstreams and suffering from their dirty air. And yeah, it's just a case of playing it depending on where you start in the race, and taking risks if you feel you can do it. So if you want to take a risk, if you're starting from P3, P4, and you feel you're losing a lot of time in these last sectors, you can see my car behaving a lot more understeering. You can see I'm struggling to stay with the car in front of us here through these high-speed corners, and you can just see that understeer kicking in there, not able to get on the throttles early. Now, if you're suffering from this situation, you might think, right, I'm going to take a risk and get in the pits, but do be cautious. If you do that, you could end up in some slower car traffic, which is going to lose you a lot more time, and you could also pick up even more dirty air and more penalties, because when the car understeers, you're more likely to get that penalty. So from the front, I definitely think the advisable thing to do is stick it out, just try and give yourself a gap. Now, one thing to do is possibly, if you are out at the front and you've got a reasonably similar driver to you in front of you, is sometimes it might be better to just get yourself from slightly further than 1.5, 1.6 behind them. If you're only around 1.3 anyway, let that car get to 1.5, 1.6. If you can match their pace, you won't pick up that dirty air as much, and you reduce your risk of getting a penalty. Now, the benefit of that is, well, if you haven't got the dirty air and there's a car behind you within 1 second, they're still going to get that dirty air. So through the high-speed corners, you should be able to pull out and keep that gap stable. So we go over the line there. You see P2, actually a reasonable finishing time in this race. But yeah, the strategies are going to be very reliant on what others do and whether you like running behind cars and stuff. So now let's just have a little look at that telemetry lap from the chase camera with the time trial lap to try and help you improve. And you can see there we've got it running in the bottom right corner with the tyre temperatures. Now, one thing to point out is obviously when you're looking at replays, the braking input is not 100% reliable, and this really does show it. You can see the braking inputs on the telemetry come through a lot more fast than what they'll do on the replay, and that's obviously because on the replay footage it's only showing you the ABS input. But you can see as we go through the corners, you can see that trail braking really taking effect, and you can see them 50% braking inputs just to get a bit of rotation in there. You can see the little spikes of the red as we go through the corner. That's just to bring a little bit of rotation in with that little dab of brakes. But again, into the corners you can really see the trail braking kicking in and then fading off as we go through the corner. That's because, again, as you fade off the brakes, it's rotating the car and you're able to carry the speed a little bit better like that. So again, on this lap, it was a reasonable lap. I think there were some areas for improvements. Again, you can see as we get on the throttle, you can see the little spikes in the throttle where we go on the throttle but then have to lift off slightly. It's little things like that which you want to try and improve and just get it into one go on that throttle to be able to carry that momentum out of the corners a little bit better. And again, trail braking into that corner, managed to get the throttle inputs quite good for there, and I can actually say that was actually reasonable because I remember actually gaining a little bit there. So again, when you get it one go on the throttle, you definitely gain a little bit on that acceleration. And again, into this left hand corner, you can see that throttle input again, a little bit up and down, where I'm being a little bit hesitant on the throttle. Could have been a bit more consistent with it there and maybe gained a bit more time. Again, reasonable there. You can see on the exit of that corner, we started putting the throttle in and then it was quite aggressive all the way up without having to lift, and then into this final sector. It's all about carrying the throttle through this corner. You can see I had to give it a little lift through here. You'll see it, a little dip of the throttle there. Maybe I could have done a slightly better line there without hitting the curb, which wouldn't have unsettled the car and carried a bit more speed through there. So maybe another tenth or so room for improvement. And then again, you can see them little spikes of lifting. It's all about just analyzing your data and trying to see where you can go a bit faster. So if you do want to use this app that I'm using now, make sure you check out the link in the description. It's the telemetry app that's there, and yeah, if you use that, that's my referral link, so click that. And at the moment it is free. It will eventually go to a subscription service, but for now it is free to use. So test it out, see if you enjoy it, and I'll be back with more of these videos in the future. Take care, everyone.